Sacred rocks in combination with ancestral worship and ancestral spirits are important in pagan traditions. Sacred rocks can be standing stones, parts of mountains, dolmens, burial mounds, all seen as an eternal and holy to pagans. Some pagans believe that they can communicate with ancestral spirits for divination, wisdom, or to be in the presence of spirits, and this often involves sacred rocks. Sacred rocks are also believed to be portals. The idea of channeling spirits and summoning them through portals is a pagan practice. Sometimes this also involves sacrifice. I believe the Stone Mountain Memorial in Georgia is a pagan memorial representing ancestral worship of the Civil War Confederate officers who are bloodliner witches that are carved into it. I'm not a fan of Black Sabbath anymore, but when they sang about war generals in the song War Pigs, they were telling the truth. Generals gather in their masses just like witches at black masses. I also believe that the Civil War was not a war between the North and South about slavery. I believe it was a war created by the bloodliners for multiple purposes, just like they always do. An attribute of their religion is slavery, because that is part of the religion of the gods they serve. They are Pharaoh's nobility, so they wouldn't be fighting a war to end slavery. My theory is that it was more about sacrifice, division, politics, and real estate, as per usual. I've only looked specifically into the Confederate war officers, and that research led me to conclude that they definitely had other attributes common to the descendants of the Nephilim and Rephaim, such as Druidism, witchcraft, and vampirism. In my video titled Confederate Vampires, I covered the recurring theme of the U.S. Southern aristocracy and specifically U.S. Confederate Army Civil War officers as vampires presented in literature and movies. Albert Pike, the 33rd degree Freemason, was a Confederate States Army general also, and a prominent Freemason who played a significant role in the American Civil War. He's the same one who wrote about 3 coming world wars. He had a direct link to Queen Victoria, nicknamed Vampiric Vicky by some Brits. European nobility through secret orders has been historically embedded in the U.S. military. Aristocratic support of the Confederate Army during the American Civil War, specifically by the French and the English, was prevalent in the antebellum South. The same aristocracy was involved in colonization of the United States, especially the South. The elite immigrants on the east coast of the U.S. who settled from the UK and France were land and slave owners. Using slave labor, they cheaply farmed tobacco, indigo, and cotton from the plantations and then exported those goods back to the UK for sale at a much higher price to the rest of Europe. By 1670, more than half of all tobacco shipped to England was being re-exported to other countries throughout Europe at a premium, since the production in the southern U.S. depended on cheap slave labor. Britain's increased European demand for these crops fueled the expansion of the American plantation colonies, transformed the Atlantic into an English inland sea, and led to the creation of the First British Empire. Another example of that is Gone with the Wind and Tara, the home of Scarlett O'Hara in the movie. Tara was the name of the southern U.S. plantation in the movie Gone with the Wind, which was about the Civil War in the United States. Scarlett O'Hara's father was an elite Irish slave plantation owner in that story. Margaret Mitchell was the author of the book Gone with the Wind, and she is from a wealthy Scottish family. Her paternal grandfather served as a Confederate officer in the Civil War. Her maternal great-grandmother was Irish and a slave plantation owner. The Hill of Tara is an ancient ceremonial and burial site in Ireland, noted as the seat of the High Kings of Ireland and the Stone of Destiny. See the pattern with the stones? But there appears to be a strong connection between the U.S. plantation owners who came from Europe and Southern Confederate war generals and also vampires, which we can see in literature and movies because the plantation owners and war generals were European elites from the bloodlines and mystery schools. In a prior video, I talked about Jeb Stuart, who was also a Confederate general during the American Civil War, and I talked about the fact that he descended from the European House of Stuart. Jeb has statues, memorials, and British war tanks, and high schools named after him. Of Gods and Generals was a book and then a movie comparing Jeb Stuart to a god. Historians write this about him, quote, Stuart had been in the Confederate knight-errant. Had been the Confederacy's knight-errant, the bold and dashing cavalier, attired in resplendent uniform, plumed hat, and a cape. Amid a slaughterhouse, he had embodied chivalry, clinging to the pageantry of a long-gone warrior. He crafted the image carefully, and the image befitted him. He saw himself as the Southern people envisaged him. They needed a knight, and he needed to be that knight. End of quote. Think about that quote. He was a knight, bold, dashing, embodying chivalry and pageantry as a warrior among a slaughterhouse. That is a description of ritual sacrifice. Jeb Stuart was a descendant of the House of Stuart, which is an ennobled Rex Deuce dragon bloodline, which I've covered in many videos before. Stuarts are the contemporary House of Gold, which is why Jeb Stuart was known as the Knight of the Golden Spurs. The Stuart bloodline is one of the most plausible bloodlines to produce the Antichrist per Gary Wayne. Trump's bloodline also rolls up to the House of Stuart, which is why you see him using that Golden Age language, which is just witchcraft language, and they all use it and have throughout history. For more information about Jeb Stuart and the Confederate war officers depicted as vampires in movies, see my playlist titled Confederate Vampires in Movies, and this is it. For more information about the witches that settled in the United States in the House of Stuart, see my video titled The House of Stuart, and this is it. A couple of examples of the witches that helped to settle the U.S. are Sir Captain John Smith. He was a British admiral of New England and a colonial governor. He was a knight, a count, a mercenary, an explorer, mapmaker, and author, promoter of North American colonization. He was from the ancient Smith family of Lancashire, England. He charted and mapped the New World, wrote books supporting the English colonization of the New World, and mapped the entire coast of New England. Sir Thomas Smith was an English merchant, politician, and colonial administrator who financed the Elizabethan trade and ventures and voyages of exploration during the early 17th century. In 1592, Sir Thomas Smith obtained settlement rights to the Virginia colony from Sir Walter Raleigh, known for rooting out the native people and the expansion of tobacco crops. He was the first governor of British East India Company and treasurer of the Virginia Company. He was knighted for his services to Sigismund Bathroy, Prince of Transylvania. Now we can look at Stone Mountain and who was involved in the carving of the other Confederate war generals as a pagan memorial representing ancestral worship of the Civil War Confederate officers. Stone Mountain is a gigantic granitic batholith. Batholiths form deep within the Earth's crust when magma cools and crystallizes and makes granite and quartz. You're not likely to find a more pagan-honored piece of rock than this one right here in Stone Mountain. Granite from Stone Mountain was used for the steps to the U.S. Capitol building and the U.S. Treasury vaults. On its north face, it's the largest bas-relief artwork in the world that is carved. It was completed in 1972 and depicts Confederate leaders Jefferson Davis, Robert E. Lee, and Stonewall Jackson. And this thing is massive. The carving is 42 feet deep into the mountain. It's 400 feet above the ground. The carving is larger than a football field and Mount Rushmore. And they made a big deal about this when I was a kid with field trips and propaganda about the history. And they have sunrise services every year at Ishtar. They have a laser light show, and I'm going to play this short video clip of what that looks like. I'm not sure if you could see that very well, but it looked like spirits, and it also looked like some kind of a dragon type creature flying through there. Work on that carving began in 1915 and it was completed in 1972, so that's 57 years. The state of Georgia purchased Stone Mountain, the property, in 1958, and then Stone Mountain Park officially opened on April 14th of 1965, exactly 100 years to the day after President Lincoln's assassination. Prior to the purchase by the state of Georgia, it was owned by the Venable brothers, William and Samuel Venable. The brothers owned rock quarries, so they would have been the ones who allowed the quarry of the granite for the Capitol building. Sam Venable was involved in the resurgence of the KKK and in the creation of the Confederate Memorial on Stone Mountain, Georgia. He owned Stone Mountain, where a cross burning was held in 1915, and he granted the Klan an easement to the mountain in 1923. Sam Venable is buried at the infamous Oakland Cemetery in Atlanta, along with many other prominent Atlanta people, and that place is haunted for sure. His family calls him Uncle Sam. This is his family's mortuary there, and it looks like a dang megalithic structure, more Druidic stone ancestor worship if you ask me. The Venable brothers granted a 12-year lease to Stone Mountain for the carving of the Confederate Memorial, and that was carved by Gutzon Borglum. So the carving started in 1923, but not finished until 1972. So let's look at Gutzon Borglum. His parents were Danish immigrants who were Mormon, best known for his work on Mount Rushmore, but he also sculpted the Saints and Apostles for St. John the Divine in New York, which is nothing but an occult building in stone. He was deeply involved in Klan politics. But what exactly was the KKK? At the highest levels, they're about Indo-Aryan supremacy, linking them back to the Nephilim and Raphaim, overlords of the Indo-Aryans, a Nazi occult group, with their god being an Anunnaki. In the 50s and 60s, the KKK became well known for Nordicism, which is an Indo-Aryan superior occult beliefs. It's a Druidic order who are also involved in the Bohemian Grove, which is just a sacred grove for Druidic rituals. The KKK call themselves Confederate Ghosts, and the leaders are called Grand Wizards and Grand Dragons. They do ride horses like a knight, and they do have this Templar-looking cross on their stuff. This one. their symbol is a sigil. And this is it. The song Nights in White Satin by the Moody Blues is about the KKK. There was also a jazz album released in 1960 titled White Satin. The jazz musician who released that song is George Shearing. He's a British jazz musician. Thought I had a photo of him, but I don't. Let me pull it up. This is him. I think it's the same guy. I think it's this guy. To me, that KKK guy looks exactly like George Shearing. He's Order of the British Empire. It says he was a member of the Bohemian Grove and performed at their encampments and plays. This guy. It says he was legally blind, but not completely blind. And these glasses here look exactly like really thick glasses he would have been wearing. Here are some of the photos from the Bohemian Grove. They also had white robes, and there were wizards and knights. They look like druids. And on the left here, they have a curved wizard staff, crosses doing Heil Hitler. This is very specific. So, I guess that's why Sam Venable, the KKK member, who also commissioned the Confederate generals in stone, had a house in Druid Hills near Atlanta, Georgia, along with the other witches that I covered in my video titled Druid Hills. Looking at this history of Atlanta, all of it was set up by the witches just like everywhere else. Many of those witches are connected with the Vanderbilts in Asheville, North Carolina, the ones that were responsible for Atlanta, some of those affluent areas. And I'm almost positive that they burned down Atlanta as part of the Civil War effort for these people to make subsequent real estate investments, maybe the same reason Asheville was recently flooded. But back to the witches carved in Stone Mountain. All of them attended the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. This is where the War Pig generals go to get trained up. It's Gothic revival architecture, including the chapel. Stonewall Jackson is the first one of these guys I'm going to go over here that is carved into it. Thomas Jonathan Jackson played a prominent role in nearly all military engagements in the Eastern Theater of the war until his death. And the Eastern Theater included the campaigns that are generally most famous in the history of the war, if not for their strategic significance, then for their proximity to the large population centers, major newspapers, and the capital cities of the opposing parties. Here's another one of the generals from the Eastern Theater, General John Pope, hiding his hand. Many historians regard Stonewall Jackson as one of the most gifted tactical commanders in U.S. history. Stonewall Jackson was a great-grandson of John Jackson and Elizabeth Cummins. John Jackson was from Ireland, but immigrated to Maryland in 1748. It says he came over on the Litchfield ship and was deported as a thief. He was a member of the county court, and then he served as an Indian spy in 1787 for Governor Henry Lee. It says John was a captain in the Revolutionary War and a lieutenant in the Virginia militia after 1787. But Stonewall Jackson went to live with Cummins Edward Jackson, his paternal half-uncle, who was described as an unscrupulous and vindictive, absurdly litigious person having a strong fondness for gambling, horse racing, and drinking. He was described as a rascal. And so into this environment, 6-year-old Thomas Jackson, or Stonewall Jackson, and his younger sister went to live in 1830, following the death of their father. Historians believe that Jackson's low morals had a notable negative effect on this Stonewall Jackson, a knight errant in charge of murderers, I'll say. The next one carved into it is Jefferson Davis. He was the only president of the Confederate States from 1861 to 1865. He was a U.S. Secretary of War from 1853 to 1857. He served as Commander-in-Chief during the Civil War. Jefferson Davis' ancestry was Welsh on his father's side and Scottish-Irish on his mother's side. Davis is one of the oldest Welsh family names. That line can be traced for many centuries and is said to include Kings, Cole, and Cadwalder. And the motto of that family is, "With God as a leader and a sword as a comrade." Evan Davis immigrated from Cardiff, Wales in about 1730 to Philadelphia and then to Georgia. Evan Davis was married to Mary Emory Davis, and Emory University in Druid Hills is named for the family of Mary Emory Davis. Their son, Samuel Davis, was involved in the Revolutionary War, and he was the father of Jefferson Davis. He was a cotton slave, or Jefferson Davis was a cotton slave plantation owner in Mississippi. He owned 113 slaves, and his brother was the wealthiest plantation owner in Mississippi, owning 300 slaves. So being descended from a Welsh kingship, you can see why Jefferson Davis is carved into the side of a granite mountain, paying homage to his Druidic roots. But it's doubtful from my point of view that this family was involved with fighting against their own royal family in the Revolution. Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee was also a Confederate general during the Civil War and appointed overall commander of the Confederate Army. He was also the son of a Revolutionary War officer, Henry Lighthorse Harry Lee III. The Lee family of the United States is a prominent and historically significant Virginia and Maryland political family. This is their crest, and those are Rosicrucian flowers on it. The family became prominent in colonial British America when Richard Lee I immigrated to colonial Virginia in 1639 and made his fortune managing a tobacco plantation worked by enslaved Africans. Members of the family include Thomas Lee, a founder of Ohio Company and a member of the Virginia House of Burgess, Francis Lightfoot Lee, and Richard Henry Lee, signers of the Declaration of Independence, with Richard Lee also serving as one of Virginia's inaugural U.S. senators, and so on. There are at least 30 people listed with similar positions just on the page about the Lee family, and as you drill down, it goes even further. It goes on forever. On the maternal side, there are links to Queen Elizabeth. So being descended from that British aristocracy, it's also easy to see why Robert E. Lee, is carved into the side of a granite mountain, paying homage to his Druidic roots as a murderous war pig. Thanks for listening.